For the last couple of years, I've been studying one specific opening quite obsessively to the point where if I go to my local McDonald's, I usually ask for a filetto Jobava, or when I'm getting a McSunday, instead of getting the sugary syrup, I ask them to sprinkle some night C3 on top of it. Less calories, simply. I mean, people think I'm crazy when I order like that, but they just don't understand how powerful this opening really is. So, in order to prove it, I decided to join a tournament with over 250 participants where I was starting rank number 26. So, let's see what happened. Alright, so here we go with the first round. I'm playing against a kid that I don't know of, but I'm gonna give you that by the end of the tournament, this guy ended up winning 100 ELO points. So, wish me luck. The game opens up with d4, knight f6, and then knight c3, forcing black to push d5, more or less, allowing the starting position of the Jobava London. Now, my opponent played e6 pretty quickly, going into the queen's gambit decline structures, and eventually followed through with one of the most common moves, bishop to d6. It is also possible to go for a pin with bishop b4 or to play bishop e7. I've had a lot of games with all of these moves, but my opponent went for a direct play. Now, I'm not interested to drop the bishop to g3. My favorite way of playing is to allow black to give us double pawns on the f-file, because that would improve white's control over the center. And I was quite surprised to see that my opponent understood this concept really well and went for the best pawn push with c5. So there we have it, getting into one of the most standard positions for the Jobava. All right, if you're planning to learn this opening as white, this is really the bread and butter. This is the structure that you're gonna get when black has a bad light square bishop, where e4 is the key push. The move that I just did is the only way to make sense of white's pieces. Without this move, previous play wouldn't really make much sense. So the hidden trick behind pushing e4 is that white is threatening e5, and after knight d7 there is an unexpected Greek gift. Bishop takes on h7, king takes, and then knight g5. If you go king g8, queen h5 is leading to mate. So my opponent for the first time paused and considered his options. There is a choice between taking on e4 or pushing the pawn, attacking the knight. These are the most common moves, but he does go for the trade. And I, of course, took with the knight, prioritizing lower value piece. And in this position, I mostly get the knight trade, but it's also possible to drop the bishop to e7. But my opponent, after thinking for a little bit, ended up going for the trade. Now, we do get a fairly interesting position because there's a choice between queen swap or seemingly dangerous double attack with queen f6. Queen f6, I had it quite a few times where you're supposed to play queen c1, protecting both bishop and pawn. And then the game usually goes like h6, pawn to c3, pawn to e5, bishop e3, bishops get traded off, white queen improves with a small edge. But my opponent kept thinking and potentially missed the fact that there is still bishop takes on h7 in the air. This is quite an unexpected idea. So After thinking for a little bit, he ended up playing queen to b6. Yes, there we have it. Attacking the pawn on b2 and also preparing the move rook to d8. I think he really wanted to get a tempo on my queen. But here I go bishop takes on h7, where, yeah, when this happens, you just have to take it and meet knight g5 check with king g6 and hope for the best. Just try to defend in that upcoming possession. So at this point, I still had my analysis, and I knew that with best play, black should be able to defend. Stockfish evaluates this as 0-0. But practically speaking, white's play is just so much easier, especially in a rapid format. So my opponent felt for a little bit and decided to not accept my Greek gift, where it gives white pretty much two options. You can either go all the way in, head and shoulders with knight g5, and then risk to get the bishop trapped after g6, which if you calculate it well could work. But always the easy recommendable play is to simply retreat the bishop and say thanks for the pawn, which is what I ultimately ended up playing after calculating for quite a while. Yes, simple play. Retreating and preparing knight g5, queen h5 without taking any unnecessary risks. So at this point, black's position is very difficult. Okay, so bishop e7. My opponent is trying to play against knight to g5. I think his initial plan was to capture, but I'm looking at knight g5 and I'm realizing bishop takes, queen to h5 check, intermezzo with idea of mate on h7 looks pretty devastating. So I end up going for knight g5 here. The attack is simply too strong to waste time protecting the pawn on b2. Knight g5, threatening to bring the queen with a check. So my opponent correctly assessed that queen h5 is a deadly threat and ended up playing g6, stopping it. Now g6 stops the entry square on h5, but without the h pawn, you have to realize that the whole h file is vulnerable. So queen to g4, hinting towards moves like queen h4 or queen h3 check, trying to infiltrate. And at this point, I was certainly sure that my opponent was about to play king g7, rook h8. It felt to me like the natural play. But I believe king g7, knight takes on f7 was working with big attack. So my opponent does go for the trade. And at this point, it was a pleasant choice. I think it was a close call, but just taking with the bishop felt slightly more flexible. So I think I played that after thinking for a bit. So bishop takes, and now my opponent is down a pawn with dangerous possession. So at this point, the practical thing is just to try to grab, reestablish material equality, and hope that somehow you survive the attack. Because if you just play passive and also down a pawn, you are pretty much doomed. So I think my opponent did the correct practical decision to come b2, and his queen is also threatening to come back into the defense. Now, I'm dealing with a pretty weird situation because I'm feeling that my position is completely winning, and I'm looking for a method to finish off my opponent. And I'm looking at queen h4 check. He's forced to go king g7 to stop bishop f6. And now I have the simple play bishop h6 check, king g8, and then I can take his rook. But after king takes, let's say you give queen h6 check, then queen g7 comes back into the defense very nicely. So I can trade queens and play that endgame, but I mean, it just feels like my advantage should be overwhelming at this point, and I'm looking for something better. And I think I ended up playing the move rook a b1. Yes, so the idea behind rook b1 is that I am not rushing the attack. I am simply trying to bring more pieces into the game. One little trap for my opponent was that if he goes for a queen trade with queen d4, I can swap and then play bishop f6 with a skewer, taking advantage of the unprotected knight on d4. So I was expecting the move queen to g7 at this point, where I calculated queen h4 check, king g8, bishop f6, queen h7, trade, and after king takes h7, we have equal material, but it just felt like my bishops are so powerful, I must have ways to continue the initiative. But my opponent ended up playing queen c3, which it felt like a practical mistake. Now I do have opportunity to play the move rook to b3, which looks like it can eventually reach the h3 square after a rook lift. So I'm looking at rook b3. It's a very juicy move. And well, I am just expecting to see queen to g7 with same variation I was calculating, but with an extra rook b3 move. But my opponent played queen to e5, and at this point, I'm telling myself there must be something pretty good that I'm missing. I'm looking for all sorts of creative options. I remember I even considered a funny little maneuver like bishop c1 with idea to play bishop b2 and try to find a lucrative career on the other diagonal. Keep in mind that I still have queen h4 check always to win the exchange, but it just doesn't feel enough. It feels like we have to go for something that's even more clear cut than that. So I think I ended up playing rook b5 after a while. Okay, so rook b5 was played with the idea that from this square, maybe the rook will have even an easier path to rotate towards the enemy king side. And I also spotted a pretty funny idea, because at this point I felt like opponent simply does not want to play queen g7. So I think he went queen c3. Yes, queen c3. There we have it. And here I came up with a pretty funny deflection idea. So I do have a mating net ongoing. I want to play queen h4, and my dream is king g8 and then bishop f6. So that construction would finish the game. But the problem is after queen h4 check, he goes king g7. And I cannot play bishop f6 check because the queen can take. So in order to make that idea work, I'm considering ways to distract the enemy queen. So I came up with the idea to check first. So queen h4, opponent has only move, king to g7. And the only thing that needs to be done make sure to get rid of the black queen. If the black queen would be drifted away from controlling the f6 square, the game would be over. Here I came up with this funny little move, rook to c5. Now, because I am out of shape and I don't play much over the board, I double check 10 times before sacrificing a piece. It would be pretty embarrassing to make a miscalculation over the board. So we are not on YouTube. We gotta make sure the sacrifice works. But rook c5. My opponent cannot take it because that would be forced mate. And after queen to d4, I realized that, okay, I no longer have so much time on the clock. I'm trying to find a clear-cut win, but I cannot find anything better than picking up opponent's rook and then also go for a queen trade. So after a while, I decided to switch gears and start playing conversion mode. So starting with a check, and then make sure to throw in the in-between move. Queen takes queen, then collecting the rook. And the following phase of the game is actually very instructive, because if you don't pay close attention as white, black will simply play bishop d7, bishop c6. And yes, you have an extra exchange, but there is still plenty of work to be done. So in order to make this position completely winning, you must realize that we need to play rook to b1. So the whole point is that we're stopping the enemy bishop from developing to d7, because the b7 pawn would be hanging. So rook b1, pretty much one of the most important moves of the game. Now, my opponent is in a very difficult position. I think he ended up playing rook b8, just protecting the pawn so that he can try to move the bishop. So yes, he's hovering over that. Only 30 seconds left on the clock. We do get 5 seconds increment, so he's not gonna lose on time. But now I think I decided to play c3. Yes, downgrading my opponent's most active piece. Knight c6 cannot be played because I take with rook. So knight f5 only move. And this was appropriate moment to go for simplification. And then the next move is going to be very critical for white. You just need to make sure that the bishop doesn't get to develop. So rook c7, stopping the bishop from moving. Also stopping b6 from being played, because a7 would have been hanging. And now opponent has one last idea. He wants to play pawn to b5 and then bishop b7 to start tying. Not tying, but just finally developing. But yes, rook b6 stopping. Prophylactic move. And now the problem is that the king cannot approach my rook, because that would drop f7. So I just start marching down the h-pawn, and my opponent is completely lost. He tried one last idea to activate with e5. But here I think I spotted a nice idea to change sides, and rook to h6 is putting him both in a mating net and also threatening to win the bishop. So my opponent is completely lost and resigned. So here we go with the first over the board game after a long period of time. Now at the end, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the tournament because this is a tour. So depending on how these videos are gonna go, I may actually play the one in Craiova starting September. That one is gonna be with rapid chess as well, but They do host quite a bunch of interesting tournaments in Romania. So, especially if you are from Europe, it's quite easy to travel. And I'm gonna give a link to the website where you can find more details in the description. So, yeah, other than that, thank you guys for making it all the way this far into the video. And I'll see you with the second round.